Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Unfortunately, I've got kind of a difficult situation with some baseboard and casing to deal with. I haven't ever had to do this before. We've got a stained casing and a painted baseboard that are going together, and unfortunately, the architect spec'd that they be the exact same thickness. So as you can see here, if we tried to put our baseboard and our casing together and we had this stained and this painted, that obviously is not going to work. There's no way you would be able to cut a nice line along here. So had to come up with a solution. Ended up doing a rabbet detail, which you see on the end here, which is going to give us a nice offset and break right here, and hopefully it's still going to be a pain in the butt for the painter, but I think it'll look nice in the end. Over the years, one of the requests that I've got from homeowners quite a bit was to have their casing and their baseboard be the same thickness. There's a lot of reasons that that's not a good idea, especially if you don't have the budget to pay the money to do it right. I actually see a lot of lower end starter homes where they'll use just standard 1x4 for their casing and 1x6 for their baseboard and just put the two together. And the problem is, whenever that's painted, if there's no joinery where that connection is, eventually the expansion and contraction is going to crack that paint line and it's not going to look good. The other reason it's really difficult is because whenever there's inconsistency in the wall, a lot of times the baseboard does not want to sit perfectly flush to the casing. So if you come up in here a little bit close, you'll notice as I put this on the wall, the way this is sitting, the baseboard is a little bit proud of the casing. That wouldn't finish out good. If you put some biscuits in here, obviously, you could flush that out a little bit better and sand it, but that's a ton of work to do. And the other thing is, if it was my house, I would not want all of my baseboard to be biscuited into the casing, because if you ever have to remove that, it's going to be a disaster. One of the biggest reasons I hate using flush baseboard and casing is because it just doesn't ever want to line up consistently whenever you try to put things together. Just from a practical perspective, homes just aren't perfect. There's always inconsistency with drywall. Whenever you're trying to install this, a lot of times the baseboard can end up twisted, or sometimes when you install your doors, the casing has to be twisted, and it just doesn't look good having everything flush. It looks great when it comes together perfectly, but from a practical perspective, a lot of times that doesn't happen. Now, if you look over here on this side of this door, whenever I set this door, it was cross-legged because the opening was not plumb, and it was just a pain to try and get this casing to sit nice and in plane with the wall. Anytime you have to adjust a door because it's cross-legged and out of plumb, a lot of times your casing ends up being twisted, and then it especially looks bad whenever you try to do flush baseboard. It just doesn't work out good. So I had a really bad situation with drywall and stuff here, and as you can see, my casing I've done the best I can with it, and it's still sitting off the wall, which makes this sit back right here. With this rabbet detail on the end, it's going to mask that a little bit. It's going to break things up and just help these nasty situations look a little bit better. Sure, it's awesome if we can achieve this perfect flush look and join everything together when it's paint grade. That would be great, but it's just really hard to do and very time consuming. I knew it was going to take me a lot of extra time to do the baseboard in this house because of this detail. Basically at every intersection or connection where I have casing and baseboard meeting, I have to put this rabbet detail on. It's not terrible, but as you can see here, it just takes you basically your compact router with a mortising bit. You're going to use the fence, which is really easy to install on the DeWalt compact router, and then I've got just a piece of wood here that gives me my offset with my mortising bit. So that gives you a nice rabbet. You might have heard of a rabbet or a dado. A rabbet is a cut into the edge of the board that makes a channel. A dado is going to be a U-shaped channel on the inside of a board or piece of plywood. So whenever you're talking about a rabbet, that's always the edge of your material, and it's just two-sided, where a dado is going to actually create a full channel, and it's going to be three-sided U-shaped channel. So we're doing a rabbet right here with a mortising bit. So just showing you kind of my workflow here. I basically have to keep track of the ends of my boards that need the rabbet whenever I'm cutting stuff out. But then it's just a matter of taking your piece of base, it's a little bit fuzzy, so then I'm just keeping my sander down here. So that's the basic process on the end of every board, piece of baseboard where it meets casing. Your camera's completely caked with sawdust. With this house, we've got some carpet upstairs, and that's where we're at right now. I've talked about this before, but with carpet and baseboard, I usually like to leave the baseboard up 3/8 of an inch off the subfloor. That allows the carpet to tuck in there. We've got a really low pile carpet going up here, so I don't want to go more than 3/8 of an inch off the baseboard. If you're going with a heavier pile carpet, you've got more room. You can go up to a 1/2 inch, no big deal. In our last video, we talked about these split jamb doors and why I wanted to use split jambs. And part of it was so that the plane on the front of my casing, I can keep it flowing better with the face of the wall on one side of the split jamb because I've got that margin for error. So this is where you see that kind of shining through a little bit more with these baseboard connections now. What I want is I want my baseboard and casing to be in the same plane as much as possible. You'll see this has got a little bit of twist in it. It's not too bad, it's gonna look good. But we really want the top of the baseboard here to be nice and flush, and I also wanna pay attention down here that the baseboard is as flush as possible with my casing. So again, coming around here, this one's a little bit better. What we really don't want is for this casing to be really twisted. That just doesn't look good. So these details are kind of important. Normally though, whenever you have a baseboard that's offset in thickness, like it's an 1/8 inch thinner than your casing, it hides a multitude of errors with that 1/8 inch offset. These minor discrepancies are a lot more visible whenever you try to do a baseboard and casing that are the same thickness. I get asked a lot about shoe molding, and in the area where I work, we use shoe molding a lot. We do not typically scribe our baseboard down to hard surface floors. So once we get into our bathrooms, things are treated a little bit differently. I like to leave the baseboard an 1/8 inch higher than what my finished floor will be. So I want to show you another problem I have with this modern detail. But in here, we've got a pocket door. You can see I've got my, it's not my system, but it's what I do. I've shared it a lot, and a lot of you guys, it's been a game changer for you as much as it has for me, using these blocks and wet setting the jambs. I've got a video on that. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check that out. It's the absolute best way to trim out pocket doors. It keeps everything set perfectly in plane and gives you nice, crispy, perfect reveals down both sides. So these are set now, everything's trimmed out. I've got to remove these blocks, but just wanted to mention that too. Be sure to check out my pocket door video if you haven't seen that yet. Whenever we have these modern houses, you end up trying to create one detail to fix a design flaw like we have here with the Rabbet, and it ends up creating more issues down the road also. So one of the issues I had to figure out also is with the shoe molding. Now, typically if I leave my baseboard an 1/8 inch higher than my finished hard surface flooring, that's fine because the flooring guys can undercut the jamb and the casing. If you look closely down here, typically we would run our shoe molding all the way to the edge of the casing and everything would be seamless down here. Now what'll happen here is that if they undercut all this because of this Rabbet, there would end up being a gap visible down here. So you'll notice I've added these blocks onto the bottom of my baseboard where it intersects with my casing here. And the reason is I want there to not be any gap down in there, but I still wanted to be able to keep my baseboard an 1/8 inch higher than my finished flooring. I don't like getting the baseboard lower than the finished flooring. It's not that big a deal with tile because you don't have an expansion and contraction issue, but with engineered hardwoods or hardwoods, you need to have some space to allow your floor to move. Same with LVT and other products. With this shoe molding, it's only about 3/8 of an inch wide, so we don't really have a lot of space for the flooring guys to work with if I don't keep the baseboard higher. So this little block right here was a pain in the butt, but it was something else that I had to do here on this install. Whenever you're doing your cut list in a situation like this, it gets kind of confusing to keep everything straight whenever you have to work on one end. It's kind of the same as coping though. On my cut list, gets really confusing here because I've got a very weird scenario. But you'll notice I got an R on one side. That just means return. That's typically what I write down with shoe molding whenever I have to nip the end of the shoe molding. And then I use S just to indicate a straight cut. So here you see on the left side, I've got a straight cut. On the right side, I've got that return cut. And that tells me I need to rabbet it and put that block on the bottom. To put these blocks on, I couldn't really use standard wood glue and pin nail them or anything because the flooring guys are gonna need to undercut this little piece, so I don't want any nails in there, not even any 23 gauge nails really. So I'm just using CA glue for this. I've got a bunch of pieces that I cut here and essentially just gonna take some CA glue and doesn't take much at all, but this is definitely the way to do it. And a lot of times I'm just taking a longer board because I know I'm gonna need one of these rabbeted cuts on both ends. Hit it with a little activator, and then it's just a matter of pushing it on. Now here I actually already had the rabbet done. That's not how I've been doing it though. So typically I'll just push that on there. If I get some squeeze out, I might even just take my knife and, I'm doing a terrible job here, scrape that off. That was a bad job. But then we'll flip it around here. Probably been a while since I mentioned it, but you cannot go wrong with a Festool ETS EC 155 5mm stroke. For stuff like this, sanding poplar with 120 grit paper, it just makes sanding go super fast, smooths that joint out instantly, and you can keep right on working and everything's gonna look good. So that's kind of the process. Takes a lot longer to mess with this kind of detail, but that's what you get whenever you want to do these modern designs with all these details that don't make sense. It's cool when it's all done, but it takes a lot more time. One of the questions I get all the time is how I price jobs. And for a typical house, I've got a standard baseboard price. Baseboard is not rocket science, and it's easy to get a standard price for that. I've got a price for square flat baseboard, which is what this is, and I've got a price for coped baseboard, which would require me to cope both ends. On this house, I did price it higher because I knew I was going to be messing with a stain grade casing and a baseboard and a Rabbet detail and stuff like this. So I'm covered fine, but you really just have to kind of know what you're getting into as you get into higher end homes and price things accordingly for the time it's going to take. It's really not that difficult. If you look at, adding this piece on, if you figure it takes 2 minutes per piece, simple math, if you were charging $60 an hour, that's $1 a minute. That means $2 a piece for this. If you're charging $90 an hour, it's simple math, again, $1.50 a minute. So you just kind of add up the number of pieces you're going to have, and you can get a pretty good idea on how long things are going to take and what you need to charge to accommodate for these kind of details. If you guys aren't familiar with how the process goes with painting a new construction house, whenever we install raw wood, you typically always do the stained work first and then do the painted work. So in this case, we've got a lot of stained stuff going on here with these beams. These will all be stained. The trays in that hallway, which I did a video on, will be stained. Wainscoting here will be stained. Over here, stained stuff. But then they're also going to have to stain all of the interior doors and casing as well. So they'll stain all of this stuff. And after that's done, that's where the really tedious work for the painter comes in, because this casing will be stained, but he's got to be able to paint this baseboard then. So with this Rabbet detail, he's actually going to have to get a piece of tape in here and try and tape off that basically 1/16 of an inch area right there and cover that up so that he can spray this baseboard. Extremely, extremely time consuming, pain in the butt. I hope that they're able to do it quickly, but again, everyone on these modern homes wants these crazy ideas with stuff that's not typical and not standard, and this is this kind of stuff that we tradesmen end up having to work around and figure out to try to execute, but there's really no other way to do it. This is what we have to do. So we're finally just about out of here. I've got basically all my baseboard cut. I just got to nail it off. This house has really taken a long time simply because our interior doors had a 10-week lead time. I didn't get them forever, so I had to trim the rest of the house first. Ended up even having to take a break for a couple weeks midway through the job because I didn't have doors. So for the last week or so, I finally got my doors, got all those installed, which then allowed me to get this baseboard in. So I'm gonna get this wrapped up, get this house done, and get out of here. It's gonna be really cool once it's all finished up. There's a lot of interesting details. We've still got the staircase and stuff over here. I'm really excited to see how this thing comes together. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you think of these crazy details. Everyone, I know I'm a trim guy. It's easy to complain, but at the end of the day, whenever the job is finished, it's going to be really cool. So I'm excited to see it.